Hello and welcome to Messenger TV. In this video, we are interviewing Don Davis. Don Davis has been a guest columnist for the Christian Messenger, our magazine, for several years now. Don is a retired Middle East analyst. He is neither a Muslim nor Jewish, so he really has no vested interest in what he's talking about now. He is specialized in behavior, culture, and religion while living permanently in the Middle East Mediterranean region. He is also the author of a spy novel, The Children of Santiago. You will find a link in the video to buy the book if you're interested in spy fiction. Don, my first question to you is this. You've been writing about the Middle East for several years now. What are the chances of peace in the Middle East?
Hi, Robin. Thanks for having me. Yes, I've been in the Middle East for, the Middle East, Mediterranean, and North African region for over 30 years. Pretty well nonstop. Let's see, chances of peace in the Middle East. I think it's important for me to clarify there's a monumental difference between actual ceasefires, attempting to end the conflicts, and actual sustainable peace. Despite ceasefires and war termination talk, there's still substantial gaps between what Western nations expect and what's reality here in the Middle East. Unless there's like a major cultural swing to include the religious aspect and acceptance, there's very little expectation of change. Because this regional area, the leadership and the populations, they've lived this way for millennia, exclusively absorbed in their clan culture, their religion, their perpetual warfares for their survival. And religion, I cannot repeat, religion in this area is premier. They either worship the leader as a god, or worship gods, or worship a single god. But it fully dominates the cultures here. Religion is concretely embedded in the region. You are your religion whether you like it or not. And there's very little change today in the lifestyle, excluding maybe, for the most part, modern weaponry and medical. All the Middle East nations and leadership, and thus the individual cultures and the religions, they survive here by power and force, rarely by a government, except for Israel. And yet the Western nations and the leadership, which are not in perpetual regional warfare for their immediate physical existence, and instead they're constantly evolving and modernizing with only a sporadic or superficial reverence of any god or the worship of god or religion. They consistently force their decisions on the Middle East based on their Western norms and culture and expectations. But in the Middle East, and that's not reality. And I guess that's why Western, if you want to call it meddling, continues to produce only short-term achievements. What we can hope for presently, after the Israeli and U.S. strikes and triumphs, is maybe an improved leadership change in Iran, which is the core root of the entire problem. The president is Iranian leadership. Look, they have failed in their military empire prophecy claims, and in the Middle East, that is extremely a humiliating label and a very bad omen.
Don, how effective do you think are the actions of the Western leadership, more importantly, the U.S. role in the Middle East?
How effective is Western leadership in the Middle East? Well, the short answer is that Western leaders can put significant pressure on Israel, but very little long-term effective pressure on Arab and Muslim nations, at least at this particular time. Look, Robin, when Western leaders, when they come to the Middle East, the regional leaders, they immediately judge their personal characters of the Western leaders. And they do this not only by their research, but by physically looking and interacting. Because behavior and mannerisms and the related They don't lie. And the Middle Eastern leaders, they know if you're arrogant, if you're intimidated, or if you're serious. From eons, they practice this. They know if you're purely acting political or do exactly as you say, and whether you'll uphold it temporarily or permanently. Then they play the game accordingly, which will have a wide responses of immediate or later, open and clandestine, to ensure their needs and their survival of these brutal regional realities.
There's no shortage of analysts who specialize in the Middle East, but some of their analyses are colored by their ethnicity and their background. Is there something that makes your analysis and conclusions any different from theirs?
Is there anything that makes my analysis or conclusions different? Or how I get to my analysis and conclusions? Robin, for decades I've studied and observed firsthand and secondhand. I lived in locations as a local, separated from Western culture, religion, political, military, corporate identity, to ensure a more accurate assessment. And after time, the info and the behavior patterns become visible, and then they're numerically consistent, becoming predictable. For example, of my analysis, 3 months before the October 7, 2023 attack, I released an analytic report titled Israel Total War Combat Scenario Analysis, which I sent by email to notify others. I posted it on LinkedIn. It was additionally published in the Geostrategic Pulse magazine. That's Geostrategic Pulse magazine. And all this was prior to the attack on October 7th. And in it I outlined exactly or precisely what was going to happen if there was an attack on Israel. And in the report I also include the hows and whys and what would happen. And what did happen. And by the way, this was during the height of that intense Russia-Ukraine war, when the news was really jumping all over it as well, because it was a single issue at that time. However, my forewarning did not change events here. As many Arabs, they treat me as an Israeli spy or an American idiot, or both. And unfortunately, many governments, they commonly ignore analysis too, unless it's from their own. Nevertheless, despite enormous global opposition and interruptions, this Middle East war is proceeding according to Israel's security needs, almost similar and sometimes meticulously predicted in my report.
One last question to you, Don. Is US President Donald Trump really having an impact on the region?
Well, for decades the Arab nations have already had dealings with Israel. Most of it is in secret. They've had communications and all types of, let's say, dealings, but in many formats. But most of them will publicly deny it, and Israel will go along with that, not to embarrass them. In Trump's prior presidency, he did make good headway in extending public recognition of Israel in the Arab world. And now that Trump's returned into the presidency, that now again is his focus. But I would coincide or parallel all of the successes, including his first term, and this one is the fact that he's a businessman, he's not a politician, as far as his behavior and his patterns. And the regional leaders, they see that he is, and that he acts like a businessman to bring money and other types of wealth into their realm. And although Trump has the political military force, he always segues back into business deals, preferring to use sugar rather than bitter and riches instead of war. Not only a businessman in behavior, but he's an alpha. And that's important to understand what that is, especially a billionaire alpha, because they're in a class all their own in behavior. So regional leaders, they feel safer in temporarily loosening some of their long-established cultural, religious, and that's important, religious and protected barriers in order to see how all this stuff advances with Israel as a trade partner and a recognized Jewish nation in the Middle East. Not a nation, a recognized Jewish nation, which is what they are. There's a difference between a recognized nation and a Jewish nation. However, the continuity is vital because war and terror and the direct players and the threats, they have to be totally abolished. And I mean abolished completely. Because if any of the initial problem perseveres, let's say in the case of Iran, which is the root of the entire problem here, it'll eventually pop up again unexpectedly, either through proxies or whatever, just as it did October 7th, and surprise everybody. Look, the Middle East leaders, they're not stupid. And they have no illusions on how quickly things can rescind and explode into regional chaos, terror, and war here. The region must have some kind of prolonged stability and security in order to heal from the thousands of years of conflict and pain. Particularly rest from the the nearly 2 years of war, which all sides have suffered horrifically, and there is no way of returning to status quo or forgiveness. The root cause and true stoppage of war with a single victor is necessary in order for the region to embrace business instead of war and erase the memory of the harsh hostilities. Otherwise, the Middle East nations and leaders will just continue to experience persistence of threats and terror, and Iran acting as a terror state. And no matter the pressure that USA and EU puts on these nations here, including Israel, everyone will revert back to their standard actions and reactions of smoke and mirrors to protect themselves and their interests. Because in this region, war, terror, and thus torture and death are always the prominent threat. Getting rich is secondary, because if you're dead or mangled, who cares about enjoying the wealth? That's the Middle East reality. And that's what Westerners consistently overlook. Nevertheless, look, I don't want to seem like this is a bad thing. It's a good thing to try to settle the Middle East situation. It's honorable to try and get this thing settled once and for all. And if it can be accomplished with as little bloodshed as possible, which many times seems impossible, then it should be done. Because in turn, if it does happen, almost everyone knows that this Middle East is going to turn into just a garden and a powerhouse of finance, technology, business, resort, and tourism. The likes much this world's never seen before, because they have so much to offer here, being the culture of civilization. It's important to try to get and maintain a peace here with the reality of what's going on at this exact time and space, and to understand the religion and the culture along with it that is really affecting the way Iran goes and directs. And if you don't understand what's behind their religious, let's say, fever and passion, you don't get it. Look, Robin, I know you provide great support for the peace in this region, and I thank you for your support and prayers. And again, I'm not good on speaking and doing these interviews because I haven't done them in years, and I'm just really not prepared to do it because I'm the type of analyst that presents my stuff in writing or with my laptops and everything with me. But thank you very much for allowing me to do the interview, and I hope you can use some of the content. Thanks again for your support in the Middle East, for your ministry, and your prayers.